Thanks everyone for joining today's POEF session. We appreciate having you here. I see some familiar faces. Hi, Anya. Hi. You're welcome to, if you'd like, come on camera. We would love to say hello, or also please feel free to share your name and your location in the chat. Would love to introduce with anyone we haven't spoken with yet. Great to see faces. Hello. We'll just kick off momentarily as more people are joining in. I know, Butaka, realize this is a late one for you. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Maria. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. Lovely to meet you all.
Hello.
Maybe with that, Ellie, would you suggest we get started or wait another minute or two? Get started?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the meantime, people can share in the chat where they come from.
Perfect. So with that, hi everyone. My name is Maria. I'm an associate program director here with PFMD. And as we said, thank you so much for joining us today. This session is going to focus on one of our projects within PFMD, our patient engagement and patient experience data project. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what we've done in the past in this work and where we see the initiatives moving forward in 2025. So we appreciate you all being here to help us brainstorm and think about next steps and future directions. Just as we're getting into things, if we could just jump to the next slide. Perfect. We just have a couple of housekeeping items. Again, throughout the conversation, we will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions about anything that's coming up, please don't hesitate to enter your questions in the chat over the discussion. During the speaker portion, we'd ask that everyone please mute your microphones. In the second half of today's session, we will have a full co-creation activity and go into breakouts. So there will be an opportunity for interaction at that point. But during the speaker portion, please feel free to use the chat and we'll be happy to respond to your questions. The session will be recorded and we'll also be sharing out the slides, so you'll have access to all of the information. And along the way, we will be also sharing some links that are spoken about during the presentations. The other thing that I just want to share, if we go into the next slide, is that we also have AI translation available. And so you can see, I think if this is coming up for you as well, a little pop-up on the slide. So there's translation available in 50 languages through the app Worldly. If you would like to use the translation function, what you have to do is click the open button that you see on the Wordly app on the top right corner, and then just select your preferred language. From there, the automatic translations will appear on your Zoom. And if you'd like to switch between the chat and the AI translation, just click on those apps I think it's usually on the below bottom of your Zoom screen. And there's some images there with the arrows, which is perfect. With that, I see the numbers are growing, and so I think we can kick off the session, and I'll hand it over now to Haley Chapman to get us started.
Thanks very much, Maria. Hi, everyone. Great to see so many people, so many familiar faces and some new faces. Appreciate seeing the comments in the chat as well. So welcome to my fellow Torontonian. I'm also based in Toronto, but the work that I do is certainly global in scope. My role as a senior program director at PFMD, and I lead the patient engagement and patient experience data initiative together with a full collaborative effort from many different stakeholders, contributors as well. And we're really excited to have you here today and to be able to share some of our progress and to also gain your insights and help us progress in any number of different activities and initiatives. On the next slide, you'll see who's joining me today in terms of their contributions and expertise. We have Angela, Neil, and Nicole with us. And I'd just like to take a moment and ask each of them to share a little bit about why patient engagement and patient experience data is really close to their heart and why this is an important conversation to be had. So Angela, if I can start with you, if you could just give yourself a brief introduction.
Thanks so much, Haley. Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Bilku, and I work for Roche. I work with the Global Patient Network team and am a Global Patient Partnership Leader there. Work both in above disease area as well as within a disease area as well. But in the above disease area, I am the Clinical Research Strategy and Engagement Catalyst. And what that means is my job is to embed patient experience data, patient engagement, patient perspectives in all that we do along the R&D continuum, starting from early development all the way to late stage. So I live and breathe this every day, and get a lot of energy around this. I think the patient voice is incredibly important in drug development. And if we are truly going to bring transformational medicines and put them in the hands of patients, patients need to be involved in the development of those medicines. It's a non-starter if they're not. So that is my goal, my mantra within Roche, and what I've been doing over the last 2 years.
Fabulous. Thanks, Angela. Certainly a topic very close to your heart, as you said, living and breathing it every day. So wonderful to have you here. Neil, can I turn to you, please?
Yes, sure. It's great to be here, see you all here today. I'm Neil Bertelson. I started this journey many, many years ago in the 90s as a patient advocate. And one of the things that I really noticed back that time was that decisions were being made about our healthcare without anybody ever talking to us. And so this idea that decisions should be made with us has been growing for decades. And we're now at the point where we're backing up, not just having a voice, which is fine, but actually bringing evidence to the table and combining those two things together. So I work directly with health technology assessment bodies through work I do with HTAI, but many other stakeholders, patient groups as well. And we see every time that having that patient knowledge and perspective in decision making helps us to genuinely improve the quality of those decisions. So it's great to be joining you today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Neil. It's great to have you on the call and certainly bringing a lot of expertise and experience, as you have also been very involved with the PE and PED project from its very early days. So great to have you here. And certainly last but not least, Nicole, I would love to hear from you, please, if you could introduce yourself too.
Hi, everyone. My name's Nicole. I'm the research involvement lead at Parkinson's UK, so I look after our patient involvement program. I believe my colleague Laura is also on the call today. And we're leading the way now in patient engagement, and we're becoming more and more confident with working towards embedding patient experience data and patient engagement within clinical trials and working with pharmaceutical companies. It's something that we're gaining more and more confidence in as an overall area. We're trying to push the agenda forward for other patient organizations within the UK to become more confident when it comes to patient engagement and patient experience data, and very much looking forward to the discussions today. So nice to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. Wonderful to have you on board as well, too, and certainly hearing the perspective from the patient community and patient organizations. It's wonderful. So let's move on and have a brief overview in terms of what we're hoping to achieve today. So our goals, what do we hope that we can encourage all of the discussion and the conversation about? Well, first and foremost, we want to reflect on what's happening within the system, within the healthcare system, within patient engagement, within patient experience data, and specifically looking around how can we progress in terms of clarifying, integrating, and streamlining the use of patient engagement and patient experience data. Those are three terms that we will come back to and provide more details and an explanation, but is certainly central to the discussion today. And that again is the clarifying, the integrating, and the streamlining. The second thing that we'd like to be able to discuss as well, and to hear from all of you, is around what are some of the current gaps and what are also the opportunities for certainly advancing the use of patient engagement and patient experience data in healthcare decision-making. And then finally, it's certainly very much a theme across our POEF virtual sessions, is how can we collaborate? How can we certainly come together, share our experiences, share our perspectives to really help define what's next? What are the next activities? Where should we be focusing our efforts around some of the things you'll hear about today, but also more broadly in terms of our PE and PED project as well too. So that's what we hope to achieve today. And before we take a deep dive into all of that, I just would like to share a few slides to provide a little bit of the context around our conversation today. And so on the next slide, you'll see certainly how we're thinking about and seeing how there has been an acceleration of thinking about patient engagement and patient experience data. And so one more click through, thank you. So that is really a demonstration that over the last 3, 4, 5 years is certainly thinking about where we're seeing more consideration for patient engagement and patient experience data, specifically from regulatory agencies around the world, certainly from HTA bodies around the world, and also more recently in terms of investors and the investment community, how they are also starting to look more carefully at patient engagement and patient experience data to help de-risk some of their investment decisions. But you can see any number of different organizations highlighted there in terms of, for example, the World Health Organization, and certainly thinking about last year as sort of thinking about the social participation in healthcare decision making. We see representation there from the FDA, the EMA, the MHRA, and any number of other regulatory and HTA bodies that are really increasing their consideration for PE and PED. Below that, if we click through again on this slide, you'll see some of the initiatives and activities where PFMD and our collective efforts with all of our partners and collaborators have progressed in developing various resources, publications, and tools to really help drive this increasing consideration. So yes, we're working very closely with our collaborators and our partners to think about resources and tools, how we can support this. But what we're also seeing is this increasing consideration by the various different stakeholders and how the resources and publications and all of our collective efforts are really helping to strengthen this involvement as well too. So great to see this progress that's being made, but certainly recognizing, again, on the next slide, that there are challenges. There are issues that we hear from our collaborators, from many of you in the P and PED landscape, and that's subsequently what has really driven the project forward. So certainly I'm not going to read through every single one, but it's thinking about this understanding of patient experience data. What exactly do we mean by that? And how is that different from patient engagement? So really trying to add that clarity behind patient engagement, patient experience data. And what about integrating patient engagement into the process of designing, collecting, generating, and analyzing patient experience data? How do we ensure that patients and the patient community are involved, again, in that design and contextualization of the data? And then from the patient organization's perspective, how are we addressing concerns around duplication of effort? So really thinking that one company or one a sponsor may be collecting patient experience data in a particular disease area or therapeutic area, but at the same time, so is company 2, 3, 4, and 5. And at the same time, they may be asking the same patient community, the same patient organization to respond to questionnaires, be involved in focus groups, be involved in the collection of patient-reported outcomes, etc. And so that burden on the patient community, how can we think about better streamlining and focusing on a more efficient and effective way to collect that data as well? So all of these challenges really help to drive forward certainly our work within the P and PED project. And on the next slide, you'll see where our objective of that project is really around these 3 words again: clarifying, integrating, and streamlining the design, generation, analysis, and decision-making about patient experience data, but also not just for the patient community, but very much with the patient community. And you can see some of the core principles that we have embedded in this project, certainly thinking about making sure that the patient voice is integrated into the design and generation of patient experience data, thinking about how we can better streamline and make sure we're not duplicating efforts, ultimately measuring what is most important to the patient community as well too. And so this is what our guiding sort of North Star for the project has been over the last 4 years. And with that, we have had, and as I've referenced a couple of times, any number of collaborators and supporters with the work that we're doing. So you'll see on the next slide, maybe some of you are represented in this slide as well, the faces, the companies that have really helped to progress the project and the resources that we've developed. Again, a huge thank you for all of those people who have contributed substantially to the work that we're doing and really helping to shift the needle, move the needle in terms of our work with PE and PED. So as I mentioned, again, the three words coming up for this discussion as we think about the three sort of key pillars that we really want to focus on. And that is the first one in terms of clarifying. And so when we talk about clarifying, this was early stages for the project, but still certainly ongoing now as well. But again, what are we talking about when we're distinguishing between patient engagement and patient experience data? So how do we make sure that that's understood? And then more specifically within patient experience data, what exactly does that mean when we think about the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why of patient experience data? So that's what we're focusing on with clarifying. In the next area then, the next pillar in terms of integrating. So here we're talking about how do we actually integrate patient engagement and patient experience data to help inform decision-making by the regulatory and the HTA bodies. And in a second way, also thinking about how do we integrate patient engagement into the process of collecting patient experience data. So that's been sort of a second pillar and certainly evolving over time as we've worked through this. And then finally, in terms of streamlining, this is very much what we're talking about in terms of making sure we don't duplicate effort and that we are very considerate of the burden on the patient community to make sure we're doing this in the most efficient and valuable way. So these are the three key areas that we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into. Once we hear from the panelists as well, who will provide some experience and expertise in these areas, later on in today's session, we will also have an opportunity to go into smaller breakouts. Each breakout room will focus on one of these areas. And so as you're listening to the next few minutes, please keep in mind, which area is it that you think that you would like to be able to learn more, to hear more, and potentially contribute towards in terms of the clarifying, the integrating, and the streamlining as well? So let's begin with the first one in terms of clarifying, and just wanting to quickly review around what it is, the work that we've done in the patient engagement and patient experience data initiative to really progress with the clarification. And again, we're talking here about patient engagement and also the distinguishing factor between patient experience data. Some of you will be familiar with the resources that you see on the screen here, but we've had any number of publications. We've involved and had opportunities to present at various different conferences and sessions, whether it be patient engagement open forum sessions, ICHOM, ISPOR, a number of different places where we've been able to share this work. But first and foremost, I think primarily what has come through this work, and again, some of you may be familiar with it, is the Global PED Navigator. And so the first tool really to help to better understand what we mean by patient experience data, identifying the what behind it, the how in terms of how it's measured, what sort of methods and tools can be used. And then certainly thinking about how that can be further developed into how patient experience data is being used for decision making. So with that overview in terms of the clarification, I'd like to call in Angela here, and Angela, to hear from your perspective a little bit more about, from an industry side, what are you noticing around this idea of the clarification between patient engagement, patient experience data, and how has that been progressing in your day-to-day activities at Roche?
Yeah, thanks so much, Haley. I mean, just to ground ourselves, we know that patient experience data provides us really important information about a patient experience with a disease, condition, and therapy. And this data is really important because it helps us to define what outcomes to focus on, what outcomes are most important to patients and what we should focus on. It also helps us to define patient community preferences, as well as potential impact on patients. And I want to call out caregivers' quality of life, because caregivers are just as important as patients and needs to be considered in the context of experience as well. what I'm seeing, and it's really quite exciting to be honest with you, is an increased interest in patient experience data, but moving away from a theoretical conversation around what it is, why do we do it, how do we incorporate it, to how do we do this practically? And so tools like the Global PED Navigator are going to become increasingly important. And so I'm just going to do a little plug for my co-creation session in terms of clarifying and really thinking through the Navigator and how do we ensure that that tool serves you as you're thinking through patient experience data within the context of your organizations. I'd be remiss if I didn't share recently. I reviewed some guidance that came out of ICH, and I was super excited to see the guidance. And the reason for that is because the guidance was around patient preference studies, which is a type of PED, and it underscored the importance of shaping studies with the patient community from inception of the study to implementation. And it was a clear call out to say that if you're going to collect information about preferences, you need to ensure that you talk to the stakeholders to frame the study in the right way. And I think that's the trend that I'm starting to see. I'm really excited in terms of this call out of ensuring that patients are included, the community is included as we're thinking through studies around patient experience data. Haley, you already touched on it, and it's one of the things that I wanted to chat about as well, which is an increased interest around regulatory and HTA bodies. While I think HTA bodies have had more experience with PED because of the nature of their decision-making, what's really interesting is an increased interest among regulators, actively seeking patient input and incorporating PED into their processes to ensure that they consider the patient perspective. And every time we meet with the regulator, it's something that's asked for. So there is an increased interest. Now, with that being said, I don't want to say challenges because I don't want to talk in the negative. I'm going to talk about it from a perspective of opportunities, which is how do we ensure, and this is a question for this group to consider and think about, but how do we ensure that PED is consistently considered in decision making? And it's not just left up to a regulator or the person at the desk with the dossier who has a keen interest in patient perspective, but it's just integrated as part of decision making. And to that fact, I think, again, Haley, you called it out, right? It's getting clear direction from regulators on how they view PED, how to submit patient experience data, but also how it's considered as part of the decision making, which I think will lend itself to greater consistency, at least from an industry perspective. We don't want to inundate the regulators with all this data that might not be useful to them. So I think getting some clear guidance as well will also enable that consistency of including patient experience data as part of decision-making dossiers. The last piece I really want to talk about, and I do want to challenge us to think through, where it's possible, how do we democratize patient experience data? How do we make it accessible to stakeholders in the health ecosystem in order to enable their decision-making as well? And I recognize that it's no small feat to do that, but I think we need to start the conversation around that because I think this information is going to be incredibly important as we talk about putting the patient at the center, but truly putting the patient at the center of what we're doing. So I'll pause here, Haley, if you wanted to come back to me because I threw it a lot. Clearly, I have a lot of passion for this.
Yes, it's coming through the Zoom call loud and clear, Angela. It's wonderful. Thank you. Really appreciate your insights and certainly a lot of experience as you've described. Wanting to go back to a couple of key points that you mentioned, and I think it's very important. You began right away by saying that this includes caregivers as well too, and such an important point that when we talk about the patient community, this is not just those people living with the disease or undergoing a particular treatment. This is the broad community. It is caregivers, it's loved ones, it's parents, it's siblings, it's family members, extended family members, etc. And it's, I think, those insights that helps to complement when we talk about identifying what is most important to the patient community. it may be how an individual feels or experiences, but part of that, part of what they are feeling and experiencing is related to the people around them as well too. And so integrating all of those perspectives into patient experience data and engaging each and every one of those communities in this discussion is equally important as well too. I really wanted to reflect as well. You mentioned about integrating in terms of thinking about from a regulatory and an HTA perspective. So that is a great segue into our next section where we'll hear from Neil. And then certainly thinking about democratizing patient experience data. That again is very much to streamlining and thinking about what we'll hear from Nicole around who are the different organizations, or what are the different organizations that are actually collecting patient experience data? Where can we find that pocket of data that we can share and make sure we have it accessible in a pre-competitive way to ensure that data is available for decision making as well? So great start, Angela. Thank you for kicking us off. I'd like to move on now to certainly thinking about the integrating piece. And if we can go to the next slide, then this really, as we mentioned before, is there's sort of two parts to this integrating piece. And the first part is really thinking exactly what Angela just mentioned about how are we taking the consideration from a regulatory and an HTA perspective, and how are they thinking about patient engagement and patient experience data, integrating it into the decision making. And so again, you'll see a number of different activities, a number of different areas of focus where we've had opportunities, whether it's to share through open access publications, where other authors have referenced our work as well too. So really thinking about from a regulatory and HTA perspective. We had an opportunity last year to present some of our learnings and insights at the Center for Innovative Regulatory Science, and certainly through FPIA as well. Those conversations still ongoing. And really thinking about the role of patient engagement and patient experience data from a regulatory and HTA perspective. So with that in mind then, again, specifically thinking about the efforts of the PFMD and PED project and the work of our collaborators, there's 4 key areas that we're focusing on over the next year as well. And so one of them is certainly thinking about how do different regulatory bodies actually think about patient engagement practices. So how does the EMA involve patients? How does the FDA? How does the PDMA in Japan? And actually to try and create some awareness and sharing around and between regulatory bodies about the type of patient engagement that's happening. There's differences, there's opportunities to learn and to share from that. In the second area, then, it's thinking about, can we consider and further explore case studies and potentially a repository around the use of patient experience data, specifically in HTA decision-making? Angela, you referenced this, and I know, Neil, we've talked about this on several occasions across the project as well, is the need for additional communication around how patient experience data is being used for decision-making. What sort of impact is it having as well? The third area then, building on the work with HTAs, is that we have an opportunity with the upcoming HTAI annual conference in June to be able to have a workshop with HTAs to actually take a look at the global PED navigator, as we previously showed, and how can we ensure that it is fit for purpose and useful for HTA bodies when considering patient engagement and patient experience data. So really excited to hear the insights there. And again, to your point, Angela, how do we turn these resources into something that is really practical and very appropriate for the different end users? And then finally, thinking about how can we consider a roadmap for patient engagement and patient experience data as we are thinking around the submission process. So how can we identify where patient engagement is important, where patient experience data is useful for those organizations that are going through a submission for regulators and for HTA bodies as well? So some really exciting initiatives that we have coming up as well too. For the next part though, I'm really excited to turn things over to Neil here to share Some great news as it relates to patient engagement and patient experience data from a regulatory and HTA perspective. So Neil, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Hayley. And so, yes, I mean, the first thing to say before we do any sort of analysis of what Hayley's just talked about is we have a new publication that is just hitting the wires about right now. I checked today and it was live, so I think you can access actually the live publication now. And so those of you that have been on this journey for a while will remember that in 2023, this working group developed a landscape paper, and that specifically was looking at the what were regulators and HTA bodies, what were they saying, what were they doing, what guidance was there, what were they publishing around patient engagement and patient experience data. And what we found there already was that there was a growing trend. Back in 2023, there was a lot of agencies around the world, both regulators and HTAs, that were making statements, coming up with some guidances around both patient engagement and patient experience data. But 2 years later, 2025 now, what's changed? Have things gone down, or have things actually improved? And we're getting even more momentum. Well, I'm really pleased to tell you that what we found was that we're getting a lot more momentum. So do not worry that patient engagement or patient experience data is somehow falling down the priorities. We're seeing across the world, so it's not just in Europe or North America, initiatives from regulators, from HTA bodies to really think through how they can give guidance or give a sense of direction to how they're considering both the engagement and the patient experience data. And you can follow the QR code here to actually go to the paper. So if you go into the next slide, because we found a really positive trend. When we looked at patient engagement and patient experience data, what really interested us was, are the regulators and the HTA bodies now combining those two concepts together? Are they thinking about patient engagement as a core component that goes along with patient experience data rather than as two completely separate things? We looked at this in 23 and we found, yes, they were writing about patient engagement, and yes, they were writing about patient experience data, but they weren't making the connection between the two. What you can see on the left-hand side in this Venn diagram is that we are now starting to see agencies really calling out the need to bring those two worlds together and consider patient engagement as integral to patient experience data. And you can see that really clearly in the bar graph on the right-hand side, where the red bars are the 2023 publications of the old publication, and the green is the new one. And you can see on the right-hand side, we only have a green bar there. You know, we could find really concrete examples of that integration happening today that we couldn't find just 2 years ago. And that's telling us two important things. It's telling us, one, that we have momentum generally about the concepts of patient engagement and patient experience data, but we have a growing understanding amongst HTAs and regulators that these things have to work together. If you go on to the next slide, I just really want to thank my co-authors for this. As you can see, I'm not going to name everybody here, but this was a really, really team effort with lots of different perspectives, lots of global representation, really coming together to say, hey, what is our perspective and how do we analyze the data that we're seeing? So you'll see in the paper, we make some recommendations. We call out that things are not perfect. What things are not perfect? Things like transparency. It goes back to what Angela was saying. Transparency on how the patient engagement or patient experience data has been considered within a decision-making process. We know that it's an input, but how did that lead to the outputs from that decision? So there's lots of areas where we see the need for improvement. The geographic nature of patient engagement and patient experience data is still patchy. We have some really good examples of agencies striving forward and trying to make this a lot better. But we still have some agencies that aren't even involving patients at all. And we need that to become much more level around the globe as we go forward. And I'll end there, Hayley.
Yeah, wonderful, Neil. Thank you so much. And really thrilled to have that overview. And certainly in terms of the findings from that paper, as you suggested, Neil, that patient engagement, patient experience data is not going anywhere. It's certainly increasing in that importance. And I think that's what any of our panelists here today, and certainly of the attendees and the participants in the session, I think really reconfirming that, again, prioritizing what is important to the patient community has to be put front and center in terms of looking at overall health outcomes, but also in terms of the healthcare system as well, too. So here we're talking about, maybe more specifically in terms of product development, but also beyond that, and thinking about patient experience data use in other areas as well. So Neil, maybe just to put you on the spot just a little bit, outside of from a regulatory and HTA perspective, can you comment just very briefly in terms of patient experience data, patient engagement within the healthcare system as a whole? Would be very keen to hear your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, we're starting to see it happen, aren't we? So we know now that across many healthcare systems, they're looking at their data much more closely. And that started really as part of their efforts to come up with health efficiencies within the healthcare system. You see this starting, if you like, with payers. But what we're now starting to see is that we have a range of data sources that we could potentially be calling on. And what I hear from my stakeholders is not just HTA and regulators, but I hear across the board from researchers, academic researchers, not just industry, from those obviously developing medicines, those assessing medicines, those writing guidelines, sort of clinical guidelines and practice guidelines for certain disease areas. They're now starting to make use of patient experience data where it exists. But if I reflect back on what Angela says, do they know what's there already? Are they able to access it? And so this is where all the threads start to come together. We're building patient experience data. We've been doing it for many, many years, but it often sits inside a box and we can't access it. And I just flick back to HTA for a second. One of my reflections on all of these conversations is we're often talking about two parallel patient experience data worlds here. When I think back to the experience of patient organizations inputting into HTA and regulatory, they often create their own patient experience data to do that. So they create their own evidence. They've been doing that for years. That's usually sitting inside the health technology assessment body or the patient organization, but nobody can really access that. Yet it's there. It's a lot of work that's been done that's sitting there that would be useful for those developing new guidelines, for example, or those thinking about how do I have a better consultation with the patient in front of me. Every single point of the healthcare system could benefit from this knowledge we have. We have this new stuff which is coming really from the industry and the sponsor, which is them submitting information to decision makers. And there we see that the decision makers are thinking, yeah, this is really great, but we need to be sure that your motivation is right. We need to be sure that this is built on what patients really think are important, not what you as a particular producer of a medicine think is most important. And so there's some sense checking going on within decision makers about how do we make sure that this is actually reflective of the patient experience and not filtered in some way. And we're seeing those conversations happen.
Wonderful. Thank you, Neil. I knew there was a reason I was going to put you on the spot. That was very insightful. So thank you for that additional commentary there as well. And it leads us nicely into the second part of the integrating pillar, and that moving beyond thinking about the integration from a decision maker's perspective, but now on a very practical level, how do we think about integrating patient engagement and the various activities and initiatives into the development, the design, generation, analysis, dissemination of patient experience data. And so one of the activities that was initiated last year as part of our project was building on the PED navigator, but now thinking about how do we ensure that we can identify these different activities, different meaningful initiatives where patients can be involved in every stage of this as well too. And so this is what group 2 of our breakout rooms will be focusing on, is really taking a closer look at the needs behind the integrated navigator and how we can ensure that, again, speaking about what Angela mentioned, how can we make some of this theoretical talk into very practical and applications for organizations involved in this work as well too. So looking forward to that discussion. Neil, Angela, you both mentioned, and certainly as we did in the introduction, the importance of streamlining. And as we've been going through the last half an hour or so, Nicole, you have been patiently waiting, and I've seen you sort of nodding your head every time the streamlining comes up, because as a patient organization and the potential for that additional burden on patient organizations to provide some of this data, help support with the data collection, there's an opportunity there to actually think more about streamlining, et cetera, as well. So if we can take a look at the streamlining specifically here, then some of the work that we're doing in this space has been building on previous patient engagement open forum sessions, where we have been collaborating with the National Health Council in the US and also with APX around the idea of a patient patient experience data dossier. And that is the idea behind how can we have one central repository of data or links to data that could be used by multiple different stakeholders, and again, thinking about streamlining that as well. We're also looking at ways, as we mentioned before, for the HTA community, but how can we look at the Global PED Navigator and think about having it fit for purpose for any number of different therapeutic areas, potentially, disease areas, and think about how, again, we can streamline this process specifically as well. So this is sort of a more advanced evolution of the PE and PED project, recognizing that we've moved from the clarification, the integration, and now certainly into the streamlining. And I know, Nicole, from your experience at Parkinson's UK and also thinking about within the Parkinson community, there has been a really strong collaborative effort to think about how to partner and collaborate with stakeholders around the use of the data, certainly integrating the voice of the patient as well too. Perhaps you can share a little bit more about what you're seeing from Parkinson's UK and share with our audience as well, how do you ensure that this type of communication, collaboration is meaningful, effective, and not duplicating efforts as well?
Thanks, Haley. I think Neil summed it up really well in terms of the fact that there's so much patient experience data being collected from all over the place, but in terms of the integration and being aware of what's actually out there is a significant challenge. Even for a disease area like Parkinson's, we're quite well connected with other organizations in the UK and abroad. So we have Parkinson's UK and Cure Parkinson's, which are two of the bigger organizations in the UK. We're also well connected to Parkinson's Foundation and Michael J. Fox Foundation, and it's great that these are all members of PFMD, which helps these conversations go forward. But even though we are well connected and we collaborate, even within ourselves, we are not aware of all the patient engagement data, surveys and questionnaires that everyone is collecting and how that can work synergistically with one another. So at Parkinson's UK, we have collected patient engagement data over several years, as have the other organizations in different areas, including research, in regulatory work, in policy, and in health service improvement. So I just thought I'll highlight a few tangible examples to bring sort of patient engagement data to life. I'll speak.
I'm not sure if that's, it looks to me like Nicole unfortunately has frozen. And so we'll just put a pin in that conversation for just a moment and see if he's able to reconnect there as well too. I think as Nicole was speaking about, then certainly the collaborative effort between Parkinson's UK, any number of other patient organizations and industry. He also referenced some of our US colleagues, whether it be Michael J. Fox Foundation, which I believe Etta is on the call as well today. And so certainly a really important way to be able to think about how can we best collaborate and think about, in a pre-competitive space again, sharing this information and sharing the data as well too. Nicole, I see you've taken yourself off camera. Perhaps you're back online? Is the connection better? No, I'm still... Okay, we'll continue on. It looks unfortunately like Nicole has had some challenges there as well too with the IT, but we'll keep going forward. I think one of the things that in terms of the preparation for this call as well that Nicole had previously shared, that yes, absolutely, while there is a great effort towards these collaborative approaches and certainly open communication and really establishing strong, effective, meaningful partnerships across the different stakeholder groups, there's still some challenges. There's still some things that certainly, it's, is it moving like clockwork? Not necessarily, but to Angela's points, how can we think about those challenges in terms of opportunities as well? And so really thinking about how do we bring forward opportunities where we can access data or to be able to share in a pre-competitive space, to be able to think about how that data can be shared amongst different organizations as well. Nicole, I think you're back online. Okay,
Yes, I
so
am. Sorry about that. My internet just threw me out. It happened in the morning and it's happened again at the best
not to
time.
worry.
So
Go
apologies.
ahead.
I'm not sure how much you heard of what I said, but I think I got to the point of providing some tangible examples. Did you get to that bit?
Yep.
Yeah, so we're aware that organizations across the UK and abroad collect patient experience data across several different areas, including policy and health service improvement and research. But we are trying to become better aware of what is going on. And also the difficulty also is that some of the data sharing has confidentiality issues surrounding it. So how do we overcome those challenges? How do we provide people with almost a summarized output of what the work has been done with patients and on patient experience data to be used, rather than, as you said, Hayley, so that we don't duplicate surveys, we don't duplicate questionnaires when we're working with pharmaceutical companies. So we do get approached by pharmaceutical companies, as do other patient organizations, who want to gain further insight into specific symptoms of Parkinson's to help inform their medicines development. That would be one area. But there would be other patient organizations across the UK and abroad who would be posed with the same question from a different pharmaceutical company, and we wouldn't necessarily be aware of it. Another example, a good example, is our sister organization in the UK, Cure Parkinson's, has recently done a survey on lumbar punctures and research to get patient insight in terms of their thoughts of lumbar punctures in research, and they recently published that data. So there's so much variations of data that's being collected. We work with UCB, which is another member of PFMD, on patient experience data in early Parkinson's to actually inform a patient-reported outcome measure, which is a great piece of work which has been published. So there's so much fantastic work out there, but if we can become more and more aware of what we're doing, it will make the whole process far more efficient. How we do that is something we'll discuss in the breakout room.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And you raise a really great point in terms of publications and just making sure that people are aware. And so I think a call to action for any of you on the call today that are involved in this type of work, thinking very seriously about how that data can be shared and being put out so that it is accessible and the insights can be shared as well too. So thank you for that overview, Nicole. And so this overview of the three pillars again, the clarifying, the integrating, and the streamlining. Hopefully this session to date to now has provided an overview in terms of the work of the PE and PED project through PFMD and the work of our collaborators, and also hearing from our expert panelists around where there's some opportunities and where there's some really great work being done. I'd just like to take a moment to pause and ask our audience a very quick survey question, and that would be, in terms of what you've heard so far, how useful have these insights been for your ongoing work, whether it's yours, your organization's efforts as well? Have you heard some things here that you think that you'll take back and actually, yeah, we could start having some conversations around that? So if I could ask the team there to initiate just the first survey question, that would be terrific. I'm not seeing anything up on my screen, so I'm just gonna check and see. We keep going.
Yeah, it's coming up. Give me 2 seconds.
Thanks, Matt.
That's the one. It should be up now.
Fabulous. So again, how informative has the discussion been so far for you or for your organization's work and effort in this as well too? That will provide us with some insights and certainly reflect on the discussion so far as well. But as we move into sort of the second part of this webinar today too, and please don't go anywhere. I know that you've heard a lot of insights, but now is an opportunity for some smaller group discussions to really think and to take a deeper dive into one of these 3 sections. So if we can take a quick look at the next slide, you'll see the 3 groups. Again, clarifying, that will be led by Angela and my colleague Mada, who will look at the PED Navigator, the global PED Navigator. So if you're not familiar with it, would like to learn more about it, could maybe put forward some ideas or suggestions as to how you think it could be made more accessible, that's the group for you. In terms of integrating, now we're talking about how do we take it one step further in terms of integrating the voice of the patient, patient engagement activities and initiatives into, again, a co-created PE and PED Navigator tool. So thinking about the initiatives and activities that patients could be involved with. And then finally, the third group with Nicole and Maria, it's again thinking about the streamlining. Nicole referenced it quickly as well around the different organizations, the different areas where we can find this data that exists. And so how can we tap into that? Well, the first thing is figuring out where it sits and who has that type of data. So let's think about how we can better identify that. So again, I encourage all of you to stick around to share your insights or just to listen in. There is no pressure whatsoever to voice your opinion, but there will be many different opportunities for you to do so if you would like, whether that be in a digital platform that we have in the chat, or if you're comfortable doing so, sharing it and coming off mute within your small group as well too. So with that, I would ask Matt then to pull up the next survey, which is really for each of our attendees to identify and select the group that you would like to be magically transported to. And we'll take about half an hour to go through and spend this time with the small working groups and come back then to be able to think about some reflections and next steps where we go from here. So encourage everybody to select the group that they would like to join. And Matt, I will leave it up to you to provide some direction in terms of where and when people will be whisked away into those breakout rooms.
Sure, of course. Thanks, Haley. Let's give maybe a few more seconds for everyone to
Sounds good. Thank you.
select
And
the
if for
preferences.
some reason, if anybody's having difficulty with the survey, if you prefer to just put your number in the chat, you're welcome to do that. And again, we can work with our team to make sure that you're assigned to the correct group.
It looks like everyone who wanted to present their preferences, select them, they already did. So if anyone didn't have a chance to do it, again, please put it in the chat, or otherwise we'll just distribute randomly between different breakout rooms.
Sounds great. Thanks, Matt.
let's go. Okay.
You're back now? Fabulous. Wonderful. I hope you had some great discussions and some insights to be shared amongst the group, and now an opportunity to come back and hear from our facilitators, our panelists, around some of the key insights that were shared in each of the group discussions. Please keep in mind as well, too, while you'll hear some of the highlights in the next couple of minutes, we will also be taking the insights, the group map, all of the comments in chat, and pulling those forward not only into a summary of the session that will be shared, but also very much taking the insights and the ideas and suggestions that you shared, pulling them forward into the PE and PED project as we go forward with this as well too. So really excited and very grateful for everybody's input and suggestions into these three groups. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask Angela, in terms of the clarifying group, if you could just take a minute or so to share with us some of the highlights. That would be great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, thank you. We started to get into a really great discussion, and that time went by so quickly. Three things I think that came out of this conversation that I think we need to think about as we move forward. There was a point that was made around the navigator is a good starting tool for folks to start thinking around PED, but there was, in terms of the outputs, the output did need to be modified to be more realistic from a metrics perspective, but also from a stakeholder perspective. And so we need to think more, I think, more deeply around who are the stakeholders that ultimately leverage PED and ensure that they're reflected in the navigator. There was a great conversation around the push and pull between not having a one size fits all, but trying to be more simplified, which drives towards a one size fits all. And so, and conversation around how we use PED to understand the impacts of disease from an oncology perspective, but also looking at it from the flip side of it, of where a patient, where we're trying to prepare for a future event like vaccines, right? And so this need of, can we somehow think through, rather than trying to do a one size fits all simplified, but actually apply a decision-making framework that allows the user to walk through and think through the questions that they're trying to answer, what would be the most appropriate patient experience data that then allows them to tailor what they need and help them to filter through what is most relevant in order to be able to answer the question. So maybe less about simplifying the navigator, but more about how do we apply what's in the navigator in a decision-making framework.
Great.
So I hope
Thanks,
I
Angela.
covered points. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. That's super. I'm just going to pull this slide down now too, so we can see everybody, but I wanted people to make sure that they understood the three different groups. So thank you, Angela, for taking that first step forward in terms of the clarifying. And I think now, Neil, if I can turn to you for the integrating.
Yeah, we had a great discussion and lots of ideas. So the first thing we did was just say, when we think about patient engagement and PED together, what does that give us? What kinds of things does that allow us to achieve? I've got a long list there with lots of votes on that. And the two that came to the top was it allows us to co-develop the research questions with patients. That was the number one topic. The second one is it potentially allows us to recruit diverse patient representatives within both PED and patient engagement. And so those were by far the two leading values that came to the top. We then asked the question, okay, so what do we need to make that happen? Just focusing on those two, what do we need to make that happen? That led to a discussion about sort of generally where are the problems in being involved. So we heard from somebody who is involved as a patient expert in these kinds of research question sort of topics, but often they're not remunerated. They're meant to do it on their volunteer time, and they have not lots and lots of free time they can give away. And so we need better understanding amongst the research community that there are systems in place for things like fair market value that will allow the research community to really understand that, yes, this is expertise that we need to pay for, and we need to pay for it appropriately. We also had a discussion about the choppiness of relationships, especially when certain stakeholders, especially industry stakeholders, a lot of change happens, different departments get shut down, you may lose that relationship. That makes it hard to have continuity in what we mean by PE and PED. It means that studies that need to happen over a longer period of time don't happen because that relationship is get broken halfway through. So we need to think through collectively how we overcome some of those challenges. And then finally, we had discussions about the need to engage with community leaders in communities that are not well represented currently in both patient engagement and patient experience data, and really work with those communities to build trust so that we can have more diverse involvement. And we have a list of case examples that people are typing into right now. I can see it happening, so that we can see some good practices and emerging practices that we can refer to in future sessions.
Wow, that's incredible. Thanks, Neil. Great highlights, great summary. It sounds like there was a lot discussed, a lot covered in that session, and really excited to hear about the case studies, etc. It sounds like in both of those groups as well, too, it was thinking about making this very practical, making it very concrete in terms of actually taking, again, something that might be quite theoretical and actually putting it into practice. I love the mention, as you referenced there as well, too, thinking about what makes meaningful, authentic engagement with the patient community. And so thinking back perhaps on the patient engagement quality criteria, the 7 criteria that are so important to integrate, that's no different when we're thinking about engaging the patient community for patient experience data collection as well, or the design as you would have it there as well. So again, last but not least, Nicole, would love to hear from you in terms of streamlining.
Neil, you're putting us to shame there, because I don't know how you got through all that information in the time that we had, but we couldn't cover all the areas, but we had a good rich discussion as well, looking at these sort of unique aspects from the different stakeholder groups that potentially could share patient experience data. So we started off with patient organizations, having been from one myself and Evelyn from Parkinson's Foundation. And we said from a patient organization perspective, what do we have as a USP when it comes to this particular area? And we were talking about how we have large networks of patients who we can send out questionnaires and surveys to. So Parkinson's UK, we have a network of over 10,000 people that we can contact. And we also have further networks through our research excellence networks and so forth, that we can access large groups of patients. We also have helplines as well, where we can gather insights and patient experience in terms of what they're going through from a symptomatic point of view or from the health service standpoint. And that was very, very important during the COVID period, where we actually collected a large amount of patient experience data in terms of what people were going through, having Parkinson's and potentially having COVID and the issues surrounding that area. We then had a quick conversation from an industry perspective, and Holger mentioned that, I'm not sure if this is across the board through industry, but they conduct something called a patient experience assessment documentation, which is where they look at the existing patient experience data, whether that be through publications or contacting patient organizations, and then they use that to then feed into their medicines, the early stages of medicines development. The next stage in which they use patient experience data from an industry perspective is when you're submitting to the HTAs and the regulatory bodies. And again, patient experience data is used to inform those conversations as well. And in terms of a missing gap that Holger mentioned was, when doing these exercises and to accelerate research, and the speed in which research is done, is that if there was a data repository where it was easily accessible for all this patient experience data, rather than doing these wide searches, contacting multiple organizations, patient organizations, doing literature searches through publications, that if there was one place where industry could access, it would just speed up the whole process when it comes to medicines development. And then I think there was a final point made around the regulatory and HTA body, and this is something that Neil touched upon, is that that regulatory and HTA bodies do collect patient experience data from sponsors, from what Holger mentioned, but what is done with that data how can that again be shared between regulatory agencies, and the FDA, the EMA, the German regulators? We know that they all think of things in very different ways, but if that data can be shared when it comes to specific disease areas, that could be very useful as well. I think that was a general summary. Maria, if I've missed anything, please do shout out, or anyone else on our group.
Oh, that was fantastic. Thanks, Nicole. And thanks everyone for the discussion and all of the contributions.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. You started by saying you're not sure how you got through so much. I'm not sure how you got through all of that in the short time as well, too. So thank you, Angela, for your beautiful summary. Neil, Nicole, for the fabulous summaries that you provided. It's a lot of content to try to quickly consolidate and share back in a few key points. So really appreciate your efforts towards that. And to all of you for contributing to those group discussions as well. Certainly, it sounds like there was a lot of rich insights, a lot of sharing, a lot of collaborative work. And as I mentioned before, the key points and the summary of those conversations will certainly be shared after this session as well, too. If I could just ask Clementine if we can just share the slides again. And just as we wrap up here in the last couple of minutes, and where do we go from here? What's next? We started by sharing some of our collective efforts in terms of driving patient engagement and patient experience data forward. And now we want to think about, great, we've had all these fabulous insights, and where do we go from this? So items 1, 2, and 3 there reflect the 3 working groups that we've had the discussions with today. And so certainly those insights will be brought forward to the work that we're doing in the PE and PED project. And certainly then, as we had mentioned before, the work from a regulatory and an HTA perspective, we will continue, as we had identified, those 4 or 5 different initiatives to really ensure that patient engagement and patient experience data continues to grow and strengthen in the consideration by all stakeholders for healthcare decision making, not only in product development, but within the healthcare system as well, too. If you'd like to follow along, get more involved with the project, please don't hesitate to reach out either through my email there or certainly through the QR code that you can scan as well, too. And with that in mind, again, a huge thank you to Angela, Neil, Nicole, for your contributions and expertise that you have shared with this large group today. Really appreciate it. And for all of you attending, we'd love to hear what you thought about the session as well, too. So you will receive a very quick survey. Just let us know, how did we do? Was it useful for you? It certainly helps in terms of our future POEF sessions as well, too. So the polls just popped up there. And while that's being displayed, perhaps we can move on to the next slide. Again, just thinking about sharing your feedback. And then certainly, finally, we do have another POEF session coming up. And so again, you can scan the QR code there, and we hope to see your active participation in the next virtual session as well. So on behalf of all of the PE and PED contributors, collaborators, teams that have contributed to this session, thank you everybody for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll chat soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.